does Sharia law allow for freedom of religion? Someone who is not Muslim could say, you Muslims, this is one of the reasons why Sharia law, we don't want it here in America. You guys do not allow freedom for an individual to choose what their faith system is, what they want to believe in. Does Islam allow for freedom of religion?
My humble opinion, there has to be detail. Yes and no. Or, I would say more accurately, no first, then yes. No.
Okay.
Yeah, very important. It's
like
very,
the concept, La ilaha illallah.
Very important. I would humbly say,
confirmation.
Islam, or let's stick to the term, Sharia law, does not allow and accept, quote unquote, freedom of religion. And it does. And there's no contradiction in this. When we separate between Muslims living as majorities, Muslims living as minorities.
Very good.
Very
Absolutely.
important. And oftentimes, when these debates are made, the opponent tries to make things like this surface here. Black and gray, black and white. No detail, no exception. And that's a capital mistake. That's a capital mistake. There are details. As we said before about enforcing the Sharia law, the difference between fiqh and Sharia law. So from one aspect, Allah clearly tells us, Inna ad-deena 'inda Allah al-Islam. The deen that is considered by Allah, accepted by Allah, is Islam.
Deen meaning religion.
Deen meaning submission to Allah. Whether the followers and the adherents of Musa alayhi salam during his time, those who did follow him, they were Muslims. The disciples of Jesus during his time, those who followed his pure teachings, they were Muslims, and that was Islam. When Muhammad came, he didn't come with the disrespect or the disregard of his brethren, his brothers that came before him. He came to acknowledge, to affirm, and to reinforce, and to give final and thorough detail. So from one aspect, no, there is no freedom of religion in Islam, in Sharia law, in fiqh. That's first and foremost. As far as Muslims living in an Islamic state, and there isn't a secular liberal government, and the Muslims are in control, then it does allow, as is proven by history, for certain faiths and the adherents of certain faiths to live under the safety, the protection, and enjoy some of, not all, some of the social benefits that the Muslims enjoy of that state, whether they're Jews, Christians, or as some of the scholars mentioned, Zoroastrians. These three individuals. Other offshoots, other subdivisions of religions, that's a different story. So as far as the concept of theology, creed, belief, dogma, no. There's only one religion that is accepted by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And I don't think it's permissible for anyone to stutter, hesitate about the bare straight answer. No, it does not. And there is no, in my humble opinion, there can never be politically correct Islam. Never. It cannot be politically correct Islam. There's no way. Someone's going to be offended, someone's going to be hurt, someone's going to be upset. There's no way that it can be politically correct and accepted by all. So from that aspect, no, the Sharia law does not accept freedom of religion. No way. And from other aspects, as long as you obey the rules of Islam, you do not harm individuals, you do not annoy individuals, you stick to the script, the agreements, you can keep your religion. You want to be a Christian, a Jew, a Zoroastrian, living under the Islamic state, not a secular government, there's no rule saying that a person has to accept the faith and has to submit, as long as you do not go against the outward injunctions. What you do in your house behind closed doors, that's your affair between you and your maker, subhanahu wa ta'ala. Final, or last but not least, let's make an example that becomes clear, inshallah. Everything becomes clear with this example. Let's talk about a hospital or a restaurant. The owners of this hospital, the owners of this restaurant, or the board that supports and has recognized and given a license for them to practice medicine or to serve people food, what they believe is unhygienic, what they know for sure, proven by science and in-depth research, is harmful to human beings. It will hurt them, it will destroy them. They have no type of apologetic sense of allowing it. This is proven against hygiene. When we make this procedure, it's going to kill someone. Someone's going to become awfully sick. So they would never ever allow freedom of medical practice in the room of surgery. Why not? Because they, whether they're right or wrong, But they feel, they believe, they have their yaqeen that any other practice besides our lists, besides our procedures, are clearly harmful and destructive. So even though that's your view, that's what you feel, that's how you were raised, this is how the surgery should be done, in this theater of operation, there is no freedom of view and opinion with regards to performing this surgery. And I don't think anyone with intellect, common sense, is going to reject that principle. So if we Muslims claim to have the truth and the absolute truth from God Almighty, how can we say that there's something else that's acceptable besides the truth? There's something that's okay besides the truth. In my opinion, that just doesn't make any sense whatsoever. So there has to be detail. It has to be detail. And the Sharia law, without any doubt, is the most detailed system of law. It's the most detailed system of law. And it's the richest system in which those who have studied, those who analyze and explain it, they mention times it's halal, times it's haram. Times the Muslims are not allowed to practice and enforce Sharia law. And times in which they are allowed, and times in which they must. Every situation differs. There's no one size fits all. There has to be a master tailor that looks not only at the size, but the style. This is no good for you. This tie is better for you. These shoes match. That's a master tailor. Someone has knowledge and experience, and he gives a detailed ruling. And Allah knows best. That's my humble opinion.
No, alhamdulillah. Jazakallah khair for that. Alhamdulillah. So before I pass the same question over to you, Brother Mustafa, I wanted to mention that the reason that sparked this conversation is that in just a couple of months ago, or less than a month ago, Saudi Arabia imprisoned someone who was of Egyptian descent, who put on the internet that he was an atheist. And Saudi Arabia put him in jail and gave him a certain amount of years in prison and certain punishment attached with that. And liberals here in America went immediately to attack Islam and, of being, restricted in allowing people to have their own choice to believe in God or not believe in God. So again, Mustafa, does Sharia law or does Islam allow for the freedom of religion? Are you, or is any Muslim out here free to choose to believe in Allah or not believe in Allah? Is a non-Muslim allowed to choose to believe in Allah or not believe in Allah? Does Islam allow that?
I was going to just say, yeah, to the brother's response. But I think that, I just want to say this, right? So, we have to understand that we all are delegates or representatives of Islam, right? And the question is posed to us so that you can get an understanding, I hope, in how to present this question and answer to people who have no knowledge of Islam. Now, we're giving a lot of theology and theoretical approaches to giving da'wah, but ultimately the explanation and the understanding and the conveyance is going to be on you guys. And so, when I think about questions like this and every time a question comes up like this, it's always how can I convey this message to the people I love and the people that are around me. And so we know from the Quran, Allah says that there's no compulsion in religion, right? And it goes down to how is that applied, right, from an Islamic standpoint, right, as we try to practice our Islam as Muslims, and how is applied to from a communal standpoint, right? And so, one of the things that always puzzles me is that when we address these issues, we give it and it's with such fervor, and we want to give the answer out, and we're very passionate, and I love it, man, and I'm the same way. But one of the things that is missed in translation is the simplicity in the answer and giving to people that are actually, the question is actually posed by someone who is looking for an out. So you have somebody ask you a question, does Islam give religious freedom? Right? And you're understanding it or interpreting it as the one who was questioned. And so to welcome someone in, you would say yes. There's no compulsion in Islam. There's no compulsion in religion, right? But then the understanding and the application of that is the da'wah that follows it.
But if you lead with yes, Islam does allow for freedom of religion, then the person could probably say, well then, okay, I don't want to be a Muslim.
Fine. Islam is not for everybody. That would be my answer. And I've had that conversation with a lot of people. We are not in the business of proselytizing people, right? وَمَا أَنْتَ عَلَيْهِمْ بِجَبَّارٍ فَذَكِّرْ بِالْقُرْآنِ مَنْ يَخَافُ وَعِيدٍ. Right? You have not been placed as a tyrant over them. So convey to the message anyone who's willing to accept it or hear it. And so when we take the onus of guidance off ourselves and give it back to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the rightful owner, we'll be able to give da'wah in a manner in which it has ease and has a certain simplicity and laying and softness. And people can make their own decisions. And so humbly, I would say yes, because the people that I deal with are looking for an out when they ask me that question. Right?
What do you mean looking for an out?
They're looking for an out of what they're in right now. And they don't mean and really the essence of the question is not, does Islam allow freedom of religion, right? Really, when I'm posed that question, I speak to people, I converse with people, the question is, does Islam allow me to be human? Does Islam give a space for humanity? Meaning that, can I still be Muslim and have my shortcomings? Can I still be Muslim and make my mistakes? Can I still be Muslims and do some of the human things that we do that put us in error? But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, huwal ghafurur rahim. So I say yes. And then we give them the backdrop and the layout of everything. Like the brother mentioned, the surgery. You know, I'm pretty sure we have 1 or 2 cardiologists in the room, right? You watch it on the monitor, the TV screen, like, oh man, they saved that guy's life. But you don't know the intense study that went into understanding how to connect the different, parts of the heart to save an individual's life, or how to redirect the blood flow so that, in various very intricate, things. And so my humble opinion is that from a standpoint of giving da'wah to people in America, yes. Afford people an understanding to have a genuine conversation and welcome them in. And then give them the backdrop of all of the things. And I'm going to end with this story, right? I remember a couple years ago, we were in a masjid, we were making wudu. And the brother had just accepted Islam, right? And so the brother comes and another brother says to him, he said, just Islam? He said, okay, come on, I got to take you and show you that ghusl. And then you have to make Salat al-Fajr because you missed it. You got to make Dhuhr, you got to make Asr, you got to, it's Ramadan, so you got to start fasting right now. And the guy's looking like, what? Right? And then the brother follows up with says, see, I don't think you know what you got yourself into. Right? Right? And so for people that are coming into Islam, especially here in the West, who have a different dynamics of history, right? For people that come from my demographics, they may have a multitude of things that affect them in their life, coming from a fragmented household, coming from drug abuse, coming from an educated secular family, right? Coming from those people who are affluent, right? How do you begin to inculcate those ideas and understandings by which people can have success in Islam, right? It doesn't always have to be caustic. You either do this or you do that. It's either this way or that way, right? Because none of us would be here if it was like that. If my father was hard on me like that, I wouldn't be sitting up here on stage right now practicing Islam, right? But it has to be that opportunity to afford people a level of humanity within their existence to come into Islam.
So why can't you just start off, when someone asks you that question about freedom of religion, why can't you just say it's complicated, get back to me, right? Why say yes? Why give them? Because what I see is that, especially amongst our youth, they have these ideas about freedom of religion.
Absolutely.
Because that's, like I said, that's their religion. And that's what they take for granted and that's what they accept. And then they read a hadith, or maybe they don't read it, but someone brings it up. They read, a part of the Quran and it doesn't jive with what they understand of freedom of religion. And how could it jive? Because we're living in the 21st century, right? And our deen, Islam, is from 1400 years ago. So how could something that was, when you look at the details of that time, how could it be that there's no conflict 1400 years later? Of course there's going to be conflict. But I think we should give ourselves space to say, it's complicated, let me get back to you and I'll give you a principled answer. I'll give you what you want, because ultimately the goal is for them to get closer to Allah. The goal is to make sure that Allah's word is the highest, right? And we want people to have that confidence and yaqeen in their faith and in Islam and not feel like their religion is barbaric, right?
Brother Daniel, if I can just kind of chime in here. To say that it's complicated in a situation where there's urgency. As the scholars, they have a principle, تأخير البيان and وقت الحاجة لا يجوز. Yani delaying clarification of something that is urgent at a time when it's urgent, to delay the clarification of that is something that is not permissible. And when we look at our youth today who are Muslim youth, as one of my talks this weekend will be about atheism and the rise of atheism in America, in North America, even amongst Muslims. Muslim youth, millennials are the most religiously detached generation that we have in America, in American history. This generation that we have right now, our children who are teenagers, who are in their early 20s. And it's important for us to understand that there is no one-size-fits-all response to these type of questions. When people ask questions like, does Islam allow for freedom of religion? Then we have to look at it from those who are already Muslim and then those who are not Muslim. Because there are laws in Islam, in the Quran, that are applicable to both categories. There is la ikraha fi din, there is no compulsion in religion. أَأَنْتَ تُكْرِهُ النَّاسِ حَتَّى يَكُونُوا مُؤْمِنِينَ. Are you going to force the people until they become believers? And many ayats in the Quran, but who are those ayats, the siyaq, the context of those verses? Who are they talking about? And then you have verses in the Quran about those, or hadith from the Prophet ﷺ, مَنْ بَدَّلَ دِينَهُ, whoever changes his religion. And those are things that need to be discussed because those things get conflated. Non-Muslims, they take verses or texts that apply to Muslims and apply it to everyone and vice versa. So it's important for the Muslim scholar or the Muslim who puts himself in a position of, being a leader in the community to be able to discern the different categories that the texts apply to. There's text and then there's context of text. So it's very important that, when we respond to these questions, there's no one way to respond to those questions, but the question needs to be responded to. Brother Joe.
I just want to drill down on one issue, and that is, when this question is asked, and generally when questions are asked about Islam, there is a certain equivocation that's being drawn between theological principles and legal application. Mm-hmm. And so when we say that inna dina inda Allah al-Islam, that the faith in with God is submission to Him, is Islam. This is a theological principle that we believe to be timeless and eternal and universally applicable. The legal implications for that are much different, depending upon time, depending upon place, depending upon context. And so it's very important for us when we're posed these questions to separate between those two, because the idea is that that Islamic law or Sharia law and the fear-mongering that's happened around it has become, the fear-mongering that's happened around it has created this idea that Islam is inherently barbaric, inherently intrusive, inherently and universally applicable without any differentiation between these issues. And even you'll find this word that's used. It's a ported word from the German, and it's even used to describe the laws that Islamic judges, they say qadi justice. So what is qadi justice? Qadi justice is the undiscernible, the application of Islamic law which does not discern between differences or context. It is merely dogmatically applied in all instances and in all methods and in all ways. And in fact, in the very early period of Islam, I believe it was in the Abbasid period of Islam, you could call a Muslim thinker at that time, Ibn Muqaffa, who was a literary giant of his time, was not necessarily a scholar of the Islamic sciences. He went to the Abbasid Khalifa and he proposed the idea of codifying the Islamic legal system so that the person who steals something in Basra is treated exactly as the way this person who steals something in Kufa. And this idea was summarily rejected by Muslim scholars for the simple fact that the context of the person who stole in Kufa is completely different than the context of the person who stole in Basra. So it's important when people ask us these questions that we differentiate between what we believe as theological constants and what we believe as changing legal application. And those are two, and that's, even in the American legal system, there's a huge problem with mandatory minimums.
Brother Joe, before you segue into that.
Go ahead.
We have 7 minutes left, and I want to pose my last question. Question that has been, reverberated throughout the years, and I haven't really heard a response that is concretely, undisputable. And that is, was Islam spread by the sword? And I'm asking all the questions that non-Muslims would ask if we were sitting in a gathering, because these are, ru'us al-aqlam, as they say. These are the red button, the hot topics that you don't hear Muslim scholars addressing, from a Western standpoint, all right? We hear Muslim scholars in other countries, in other localities, and other demographics answering these questions based upon their contextual understanding, right? But from a Western perspective, was Islam spread by the sword? We have 6 minutes. I have 4 panelists. You do the math. You have 1 minute 30 seconds per person to respond. Was Islam spread by the sword?
No, it was spread by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala.
No, come on, man. You got to do better than that. That is unacceptable. You got to do better than that one.
I mean, I think that's like the answer of all answers. We think a lot.
Answer of all answers.
We think a lot of ourselves, man, and at times we think too much of ourselves. And I think what I was going to piggyback on what Brother Hu said, and it can segue into this as well. 90% of the question is the questioner, right? 90% of the question is the questioner. A lot of times we focus most on the answer that we're seeking that sounds right, that is correct, and we forget about the person who's asking the question. Absolutely. So if somebody asks me in the hood if Islam was spread by the sword or anything else, and he sizing me up, I'm gonna say, yeah, it's spread by the sword. What's up? What's good? You understand what I'm saying? But if I'm in a political setting, right, and if I'm in an intellectual setting and I'm asked that question, I would give them an answer saying something remotely close to, there's no religion on the face of the earth that has been used by man to spread their agenda, and they've used the sword to back it up. That's just the general context. But when it comes down to Islam, unequivocally it was spread by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Now there's things that have been done to protect the message of Islam and to protect the people who were proponents of Islam, and even the people who were under the cloak of governance and protection of the Muslims, and even those who weren't. That's just a general principle in survival in humanity, period. But to allocate that statement just solely to Islam, I think it's a trick question. And I think every Muslim should just say, no, Islam was spread by the creator of all of everything that you know and everything that you don't.
Or an even better question, was Christianity protected by the sword of Islam?
Absolutely.
Absolutely, it was. Absolutely, it was.
Absolutely.
Was Judaism protected by the sword of Islam?
Islam
even more so. Absolutely.
Islam Sharia law is a way by which an individual controls his humanity. Without that control mechanism, you would see a lot worse things going on now, especially propagated by the Muslims more than anybody.
Absolutely. Brother Muhammad, I'm always, amazed with your responses. Was Islam spread by the sword? Go.
No, it was not spread by the sword. That makes no sense. How can a forged piece of steel, force faith and conviction in a human being's heart? Nobody with a brain is going to ever say that. Violence can never make conviction. Violence cannot force faith.
MashaAllah.
What violence can do, it can stifle, it can suppress, and it can enforce. But it cannot enter faith into a human being's heart.
MashaAllah.
So therefore, Islam was spread, we know by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but Allah has given us reasons, asbab, worldly, earthly things that He uses to allow people to accept the faith. So Islam was never spread through violence. But those who stood in the face of Islam, who lied, who slandered, who oppressed, and persecuted those who wanted to hear what Islam was saying, that was the place of the sword.
MashaAllah.
And Allah vividly mentions this in the Quran.
Bizzabit.
Allah tells us in Surah Al-Hadid that He sent down two things, or He sent two things. He mentions that we have sent our messengers bil bayinat, with clear proofs and evidences. وَأَنزَلْنَا مَعَهُمُ الْكِتَابِ, we've given them the scriptures. And then Allah says we've sent down iron. Fihi, in that iron is severe strength and benefit for men. In other words, that which gives faith and allows a person to accept faith, two things, the bayinat and the scriptures. That which prevents the oppressors, the wrongdoers, the tyrants from holding and hindering people from hearing those clear signs and those messengers, it's the hadid, it's the iron. So Islam was never spread by the sword. And if you want to get technical, some of the largest Muslim populations are places in which there was never a Muslim military campaign, such as Indochina. There were no wars. There were no battles there. So that's totally false. Rather, we say, don't be a hypocrite. Do not be a hypocrite. And if you wish to debate and talk, let's talk and let's have a clear, agreed space of debate. Christianity was spread through violence. The people were suppressed and killed and tortured and murdered in the name of the good cross and the good book. So don't be a hypocrite. Islam was not spread by the sword. That's wrong. It's incorrect.
MashaAllah. Concrete enough? MashaAllah. Okay, so it says 1 minute on the clock. We have to do justice to this. Please, I'm asking you to have mercy on us and extend, Ar-Rahimuna yarhamuhum ar-Rahman. Brother Joe, was Islam spread by the sword?
So I'll just piggyback off what the brother Muhammad said about the issue. I think that what his answer was sufficient. And I'd say just read through history. And when you read through history, you see the truth of that. How is it possible that there was a masjid that was established in China under the rule of Kublai Khan, which was during the Khilafah of Uthman, the end of the Khilafah of Uthman ibn Affan, the earliest period of Islam. And there were masajid that were in Bangladesh as early as the 8th century, and no Muslim army had ever gone there. And how is there enough Muslims to establish a masjid and for them to worship as a community if everything that led up to that was violence? We would have heard about that, but we don't. And so there's a lot of narratives that are being spread about us and the community and our faith that are not necessarily verifiable within the context of history or, as our brother mentioned, within the context of our faith. Jazakallah khair.
Brother Daniel, was Islam spread by the sword?
I mean, my instinct, being the contrarian that I am, is to say yes.
No, and the reason why I'm asking is because what we see with ISIL and ISIS feeds into that narrative.
ISIS are terrorists, okay?
You said
so let's put that aside. But
Islam was spread by the sword.
we have to look at the historical facts, right? Because a person that's going to ask us this question, they're also going to ask Sheikh Google, right? And what are the results that are going to come up? There are a lot of results that you can see. AnsweringIslam.com, a very old website, anti-Muslim website. And they cite sources that Muslims accept. They cite hadith, they cite the Quran, they cite historical events with the Khulafa al-Rashidun.
Right.
Yes, there is Malaysia. Yes, there is Indonesia. Yes, there is Indochina. But what about these other examples? What can we say to that? And it might be, I mean, with all due respect, we can get out of a question with that answer in that one particular moment, but what's our long-term strategy, right? People are smart. People are doing more research. People know these responses. And my approach, and I've tried to demonstrate that to some extent here, is to take a step back. If you can't do that in that particular moment, because you don't know, then just say, it's complicated, let me get back to you, or let me ask someone who knows. But let's take a step back and look at the concept of violence, right? Violence, we have this visceral reaction of it being something negative, but violence has a lot of benefits. Look at our society today. Right outside this conference, we have police officers. What do those police officers have in their holsters? It's a gun, right? They have force, and that protects us. If someone comes here and tries to harm us, there's police standing there that can use force, that will use violence, or the threat of violence to protect us, okay? Look at the United States military. If we're living in a nation state, we're living in a country, we have a military. Everyone accepts that force is something that's important, that force is something needed. The threat of violence is something that is needed in all societies. So first of all, we have to take that step. And then we have to understand that, look, what is Islam to us? We believe it to be the truth. It is the truth. It's the haqq. Don't we want to share that with others? Today, we have the internet, we have TV. We can share Islam through those channels, through that media, and get the message out there. But in other historical contexts, there wasn't any TV, there was no internet. Muslims had to physically go, and they had to spread the message by physically moving to these different regions, whether it's Sham, Persia, these other...
Was the spread of Islam in those regions, in those areas, was that done by force? Is
yes,
the question.
They fought.
No,
I'm from Iran,
My
right?
question is not, is the end result of them going to spread Islam, did it result in some form of violence? That's not what I'm asking. I'm asking, did Muslims physically superimpose their faith on other people?
They superimposed the system. They superimposed a system of governance, okay? And that's something universal, right? And if you believe, just like, for example, George Bush, in the lead up to the Iraq War in 2003, he said, we need to spread freedom and democracy to these Iraqis, right? And that was the pretense for the invasion. But his belief, and maybe not him himself, but the people who bought into that, believe that, yes, this is something good. We need to spread freedom. We need to spread democracy. We need to spread tolerance and all of these liberal concepts. And based on that, it was justified to go into that land.
But that doesn't mean that anyone that was the subject of those perpetrations necessarily believes in freedom or democracy or liberalism or anything else.
You mean
so I think
George Bush?
There's a difference between, and this is what I understand from what you're saying, there's a difference between the spread or the enforcement of a worldview, right, or political worldview, and the permeation of faith into someone's heart. Where I cannot recall in any time in Islamic history where people were held at the sword and were forcibly converted,
No, of course
baptized, and made Muslim.
No, of course
I
not.
personally can't think that. So I think that while we're talking about two different things, we are somewhat saying the same thing, as the brother mentioned earlier about the idea of what you meant from Surah Al-Hadid.
Yeah, of course not. No one is saying that swords were held to people's necks and said convert or else. Obviously that's historically has never happened, and nor would it happen for anyone who is following Sharia. But did Muslims go out from the Arabian Peninsula with swords, which was their weapon of choice at the time, and go into other lands thinking that they would spread Islam? And were they opposed, and did they fight? Yes, that's a historical fact. By the companions, the Sahaba of the Prophet ﷺ. Are we going to denounce them? Are we going to? No, I mean, we have